Hello and welcome back to my channel. In this video I will show you how I created this using the Canon R6 in Programmed Automatic Exposure Mode, or P mode, to achieve a smooth day-to-night cityscape time-lapse, and then the post-production workflow, making composition adjustments, removing unwanted objects and colour enhancements. For this time-lapse I used the Canon R6 with the brand new 28-70 f2 zoom lens. Please refer to another of my videos that covers the setup for the custom programmed auto exposure mode for time-lapse photography using the Canon R5 and R6 cameras. First of all, set the exposure mode to P. The P mode has been set up and saved as a custom exposure setting using the C1 option on the main exposure dial. This allows for a faster setup for shooting a time-lapse scene and eliminates any costly errors. I will go through the basic settings here. Okay, so first of all, switch the camera into C-RAW mode, then flip to the ISO speed range. This is where you can set minimum and maximum ISO values. So for this, I've set it to 1600 ISO. Make sure your white balance is off, auto white balance, and then flip to the interval timer will set later on, so electronic first curtain is a good option for most time-lapse. Keep the image stabilizer off. Auto focusing is going to be turned off, so turn on the manual focus peaking guide. Switch it to airplane mode on. Then we will go to auto switch card so that we have continuous recording. Turn the beep off. Exposure increments to 1/3 stops, and ISO speed settings at 1/3 increments. Safety shift is set to ISO. Now this is where we set the shutter speed range. So this is the maximum and minimum shutter speed that the camera is going to go to, and maximum and minimum aperture values. And that is basically it. So then we register and save those as a custom shooting mode, and then we're ready to shoot. Just a few other things we need to make sure that we have it in 1 point focusing, but it's going to be switched to manual anyway, and also that the drive mode is set to 1 shot. Then we switch the camera into manual focus, and then we turn off any stabilization system on the lens. Okay, so my default aperture setting was actually f16. I want to drag that down to f11. So we can hit OK. So now, when we look at the screen, we're starting off at, we're looking at 1/30th of a second, and we're looking at f6.3 as a starting point. I want the ISO set to automatic. So we're looking at auto ISO. Looking really nice. So let's set this running and see how this runs in program priority mode. So just one thing I need to set up, and that is the interval timer. Okay, so we need to enable that. Let's go back into the timer. We're going to hit. Okay, so we're going to set that to 3 seconds, I think. Okay, so that's now set. Let's go back to the menu. Electronic first curtain. Let's see how that works. Looking really nice outside. One last modification I'm going to make, and I'm going to change the high shutter speed to 1/15th of a second. I'm going to hit OK, and we're back. So now we're looking at f8, 1/15th of a second. The ISO is down to 100. So we're going to hit play, and we're going to see how this looks. So we're about 10-15 minutes in to shooting this time lapse. You can see we've got these really amazing pink kind of hues, pink and blue hues across this cityscape in Manama in Bahrain. It looks really amazing. So what's happening with the time lapse is that we have the minimum aperture is f5.6, the maximum shutter speed has been set to 1/15 of a second. So now the aperture is being forced down to f5.6. It's f6.3, is bouncing between 6.3 and 5.6 at the moment. And you can see the ISO is now beginning to creep up slightly. So the ISO is going to start to be pushed up as the aperture goes towards its absolute minimum value of f5.6. So that's the widest aperture it's going to go to. This is a lens that can go down to f2, but we don't want it to go that far. We want it to max out at f5.6. Once the ISO reaches its max value, the shutter speed will then start to change from 1/15 down towards 8 seconds. 8 seconds is the slowest the shutter speed is going to go for this time lapse. Look at the sky, you can see it's beginning to get slightly dimmer. What's happening now with the screen is that the ISO is now creeping up to around 320. The aperture is now maxed out at f5.6. So the shutter speed is going to remain at 1/15 of a second until the ISO has reached its maximum. You can see that the lights are now coming on the buildings, and there's a significant change in light. So what's happening now is that the ISO is now going to max out at 1600 eventually, 1250 at the moment. The aperture is now, I think it's now settled at f5.6. But now we've hit the 1600 ISO maximum value. Histogram's looking good though. So we know that everything is exposed properly. If you can look now, you can see that there is the sun has basically gone in. So it's just now a matter of time when everything just starts getting dark. We just want that aperture value to settle down at f5.6, and now the shutter speed should now start to slow down. So in the next update you should see the shutter speed slowing down significantly. So quick update as to what's going on. The plan is working. So we have a situation where we're at f5.6 and it's leveled off now at f5.6. That's the maximum aperture that we set it to. It can't go any wider than that. ISO has maxed out at 1600. That's what we kind of planned. We didn't want it to go any higher than that. Okay, now as a result of the ISO maxing out, the shutter speed is now slowing down. So we went from 1/15 down to 1/8 of a second. That's going to carry on slowing down now as the light outside starts to fade, which is quite rapidly beginning to fade, and the lights on the buildings are coming on, and it's looking really nice. I mean, histogram is looking pretty good still. Everything's properly exposed. The camera's kind of automatically worked out the settings. It kind of knows what it's doing now. It's not jumping between 5.6 and 6.3. It was doing that for about 15-20 minutes. And I have to say, it's really not going to have any impact on the overall time lapse at all. It's really not going to matter. It's been exposing correctly the whole time. So we've now dropped down to 1/6 of a second. Big change in light now. You can see it's a proper sunset. Cityscape sunset that we've got here. It looks really, really nice. And the shutter speed is gradually being dragged down towards 8 seconds. So the plan is working. 0.6 seconds. The light is really beginning to really diminish now. And these floodlights have now come on, which is really annoying. So we're getting some annoying floodlights in front of us, but we're down to 0.6 of a second. So the shutter speed is gradually dragging downwards. It's kind of ruined the time lapse slightly because this whole scene is just being washed out. So there's not really much I can do. It looks like it's going to max out at 0.8 of a second again. So barely, it almost got down to a second long exposure. Not quite.
So I had to stop the time lapse early, which was really unfortunate. But I'm just going to quickly run through some of the images. Now this is me playing back all the photos that were recorded on the actual camera. So you can see that the exposure was actually very, very smooth. Even though the camera is bouncing between 6.3 and f5.6, it doesn't seem to have any impact on the actual frames. There's no flickering or any irregular exposure issues. But some of the things I would have done better, I could have started the time-lapse much earlier, maybe 15-20 minutes earlier, which means I would have started at an aperture of f11. And also I think that the ISO value of 1600 is way too high. I think 400 or 800 would have been much better. If I'd have done that, then the shutter speed would have decreased or slowed down much earlier. Coming up in part 2, I will take you through the whole workflow when it comes to processing the raw files using LRTimelapse and also Adobe Lightroom. I will also show you how to remove any unwanted objects using Adobe PhotoShop and also compositional adjustments and color corrections.